My name is Lee Moore, and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast. So today is our first episode of the podcast in which I am officially Robless, and even though I feel like this was a case of highway robbery, I think y'all are going to like this new format. And since this is a new beginning, I thought, what better way to do this than to go all the way back to the very, very, very beginning of Chinese literature? Let's just get to it. I'm going to read what may very well be, possibly, the first thing ever written in Chinese. Are you ready? Okay, here's one text. Crack making on Guisu, day 30. Jue divined, in the next 10 days there will be no disaster. Oh, thank goodness. Prognostication. The king, reading the crack, said, there will be harm. There will perhaps be the coming of alarming news. Verification. When it came to the 5th day, Ting Yu, that is day 34, there really was the coming of alarming news from the west. Zhiguo reporting said, the Dufang are besieging our eastern borders and have harmed 2 settlements. The Gongfang also raided the fields of our western borders. Now, that's one possible thing that could be the first thing that's ever written in Chinese. Let me read you another. Crack making on the Guizhou, day 50. Cheng divined. From today, Tingsu, day 54, we will not perhaps harm the Zhou. Or, crack making on the Guizhou, day 50, Cheng divined. From today, the Tingsu, day 54, we will harm the Zhou. The king, reading the crack, said, down to the Tingsu day, we should not perhaps harm them. On the coming Jiazi, day 1, we will harm them. On the 11th day, Guihai, our chariots did not harm them. And in the Dou period, between the evening and the Jiazi, day 1, we really harmed them. Okay, so you may be listening to this and thinking, what the heck is he talking about? This sounds like gibberish. It kind of is. These are these 2 things that I read you. So there was the first one about there will be harm and the coming of alarming news. And then there were actually 2 pieces of a complementary pair of what is called Jia Gu Wen. That's Chinese. It's short for Gui Jia Shou Gu Wen Zi, which literally just means turtle shell and animal bone script writing. So these are 2 of approximately 133,000 texts that we have today that might perhaps be the earliest thing ever written in Chinese. As y'all have probably guessed, I'm talking about what we call in English oracle bones. This is what inspired Peter Hessler's excellent second book in his China series of that same name. These oracle bones, the Jia Gu Wen, are the earliest written documents we have from Chinese that still remains today. And as the name suggests, they're writings carved on the scapulas of animals and onto tortoise shells. So a little bit of an introduction as to what the heck these things actually are. These are texts that are produced during the Shang dynasty. That's the earliest dynasty that we have historical records for. My friends who are Chinese nationalists may point to the Shah dynasty as being the oldest Chinese dynasty, but right now, we don't have any evidence that the Shah dynasty actually existed. It seems like it might be more mythological, but a lot of folks said that about the Shang dynasty until we discovered these oracle bones. These oracle bones, they were produced between the year 250 and 1046 BC. I said at the beginning of the podcast, these might be the first things ever written in Chinese. The truth is, we don't really have any clue of the order of any of these and when they were produced, really. Some of them we kind of know because we can connect with real people, but a lot of them we just don't know when they were produced. Why? Well, these were found outside of Anyang, in what was the ancient Shang dynasty capital of Yin, and during the Sui and the Tang dynasty, so that's pretty much 2,000 years after these were originally dropped into the ground. So during the Sui and Tang dynasty, so we're talking 550 to 900 AD, a bunch of people were buried in this area. So all of these oracle bones were disturbed, and we have no idea of the order in which they were actually written. usually. And the way that a lot of these bones were dug up in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, pretty much up to 1941, archaeologists weren't doing the digging. So those that we actually did dig up recently in, the past 150 years, they weren't dug up by archaeologists. They were oftentimes dug up by farmers who were trying to sell them once they knew that archaeologists wanted them. So a lot of this stuff is really hard to date. What were these texts? So these were what's called prognostication texts. They're intended to tell what was going to happen in the future. Let me just explain how this would go down. A scribe would write out an option of option A or option B. That's what we saw in that second text. We will harm them or we will not harm them. They would inscribe both options onto the turtle shell or into the scapula of an ox or a sheep or a deer or a pig or something. And then the shells were cleaned and polished and holes were drilled into the rough side. So let's assume we're looking at a turtle shell. So the scribe writes it on the inside of the turtle shell, and then they drill holes on the outside of the turtle shell. The shell was then smeared with the blood of a human sacrifice or an animal sacrifice. Red-hot bronze or wood was placed into the holes that were drilled in there. This then caused cracks to appear on the smooth inside of the turtle shell or whatever kind of bones you're using. A diviner, that is a court official whose job it is to read these things and to tell what's going on, they would come and they would read the cracks and they would say, okay, is harming our neighbor a good idea? Is harming our neighbor a dumb idea? And they would supposedly figure this out by reading the cracks. Is a disaster going to happen? Is a disaster not going to happen? In another example I read, it's asking whether or not the Chang, an ethnic group that's probably related to modern-day Tibetans, should they be used as a part of a particular sacrifice? So should they use this Chang Tibetan ethnic group and to do a human sacrifice? These are all examples of kinds of things that we find on these Shang Dynasty oracle bones. Shang Dynasty kings consulted the oracle bones for pretty much everything, even small decisions. Is it going to rain next month? Should we go hunting tomorrow? What will the harvest be like? The answer was then carved onto the bone. So that when folks look at oracle bones today, those 133,000 oracle bones today, that's what they're looking at. But how did we get them today? It's actually a fascinating story. The cool thing is, these things, like I said, were only really discovered in the 1890s. So in the 1890s, a bunch of peasants in Henan, near the small city of Anyang, started finding bones with writing on them. Of course, looking at them, this writing is so different from modern Chinese that they didn't know that it was writing. In fact, when they gave it to scholars, at first, a lot of scholars didn't actually know that what they had on them was writing. The peasants thought that they were dragon bones. They actually scraped the writing off of them. So they took and destroyed the writing that they had on them. And then they sold them as cures in traditional Chinese medicine. Then something funny happened. A guy named Fan Wei-qing, he's an antiques dealer from Wei County, Shandong. He's going around the area near Anyang, and he's buying antiques. So he realizes, this has actually got some writing on it. Apparently he got some sort of bone that they had forgotten to scrape off the writing. He then sold them to a guy named Wang Yirong. Wang was the first guy to realize that he had discovered something really special. Mr. Fan, he knew something was up, but he didn't really know what was going on. Mr. Wang, he realized, hey, this is something that is different. Wang Yirong is an expert on ancient bronze inscriptions from the Zhou dynasty. He knew this looks a lot like the stuff that he was seeing in the Zhou dynasty. Keep in mind, the Zhou dynasty is the one that comes right after the Shang dynasty. Unfortunately, though he's an expert and he kind of realized that he was onto something big, he actually did not have time to do research on them. Why? Because just a few months after he realized what he had, he was pushed to becoming involved with the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxers, as I'm sure you'll remember, are a group of anti-Western Chinese folks who tried to kill a bunch of missionaries and other foreigners. They were handily defeated after keeping the foreigners in Beijing under siege for 55 days. Rob and I did a podcast on a poem written in a Scottish-ish language about the Boxers. You can check that out. So Wang Yirong, actually, he was sort of a low-level government official who got involved in helping the Boxers out. When the Boxers were defeated by the Western powers, Wang Yirong, his wife, and his daughter all committed suicide. That's a tragic end, but the good news is that he had handed the bones off to his friend Liu He, who himself was a famous writer. In 1908, Liu He and another guy figured out that these bones were coming from a site near Anyang. It's called Yin. This is the last capital of the Shang dynasty. It took a while to get an archaeological expedition up and running. In fact, it was not until 1928 that they actually got their first archaeological dig going there. At that point, Chinese folks are really fascinated. They're getting a look at the earliest things ever written in Chinese. This is, for someone, who's a scholar of Chinese, it's this fantastic opportunity. So you have Wang Guowei, the scholar that Rob is actually doing a translation on. Wang Guowei is using the oracle bones to authenticate the last 9 of the Shang dynasty rulers. Guo Moruo, who we haven't done a podcast on, he's probably the most famous writer post-1949. He's also an important government official, and he does some important research on the oracle bone. So those are the guys who are taking oracle bones and they're cataloging them, they're describing them, they're translating them, because this is something that if you hand this to your average Chinese reader, they're going to have no idea what it says. They can look at it, but they have absolutely no idea what they say. If you handed it to me, I would be like, we have about 133,000 of these oracle bones today. 80,000 are in China, 30,000 are in Taiwan, 7,999 are in Japan. Surprisingly, outside of Asia, the country that dominates, can you guess it, eh? That's right, it's Canada. Canada has 7,407 of these oracle bones, compared with only 3,141 in the UK and a measly 1,860 in the US. Why does Canada dominate in terms of oracle bones and oracle bone research? Is it just because Canada is awesome, eh? Though that is true, the real reason is because 2 Canadian missionaries, James Menzies and William White, bought up a lot of these as they were being traded. They saved many of them from possible destruction. So these all were being dug out of the ground, collected, and by 1941, 96% of all the oracle bone texts that we have today, they had been dug up. 96%. The war with Japan did not actually interfere that much in the research on oracle bones because most of them had already been dug up by that point. What do these texts represent? Before 1899, we knew almost nothing about the Shang dynasty. Most of what we knew came from Sima Qian, that is the great historian, the grand historian, whatever you want to call him, the head honcho of Chinese historians. He told us a lot, but even then, it's really not that much. It's just some stuff that's kind of mythology mixed in with real history, and we didn't know what was history, what was mythology. So it's kind of weird when you think about it. Someone like Ouyang Shou, who did research on ancient China back in the Song dynasty, he's living in the 10th and 11th century. He had no idea that these things existed. From pretty much the Shang dynasty to 1890, no one had seen these, no one had looked at these, no one had read these. And these are a fantastic window into what was happening in the Shang dynasty. It's not telling us what happened, but it's actually letting us read what Shang scholars actually were thinking about. What were kings most concerned about? They're concerned about rain. They're concerned about hunting. They're concerned about smiting their enemies. Can I attack these people in 4 days? Who should I marry? These were the concerns that dominated Shang rulers, thinkers. Of course, we have no idea what, your average Joe peasant was thinking. At the very least, we have a lot more information on the Shang dynasty because we have these texts, and we can confirm that a lot of what Sima Qian wrote was real. It was legit. It was historical. Before the discovery of these, we had really no idea. It also helps us understand a bit of the history of the Chinese language. Much of the core vocabulary of modern Chinese can be found in these oracle bones. So today, some words actually come directly from oracle bones. So for those of y'all who read Chinese, words like ji and bo, that is, ji is auspicious. Oftentimes you'll see in New Year's celebrations coming up, Chinese New Year's celebrations coming up. In Chinese New Year's celebrations, you'll oftentimes have to say something that's auspicious or lucky. So the phrase for that is 新年吉祥话. That's just auspicious things to say during the Chinese New Year. Bo is just to predict. What's fascinating is if you look at the Chinese characters, and I'll put both of the Chinese characters in on the show website if you want to take a look at them for those of y'all who don't speak Chinese. But if you look at them, both of these characters have their origins in the way that cracks actually broke along the backs of tortoise shells or turtle shells and the bones of the animal. So you can look at the characters and you can see they kind of look like cracks breaking on the bones of an animal. Not all Hanzi look like cracks along an oracle bone, but a lot of what we have today from Hanzi comes directly from stuff that we can see in oracle bones. However, a lot of the Hanzi that are used on oracle bones have largely fallen out of use. Now, as I mentioned before, when I talk about oracle bones and reading oracle bones, I should point out, I can't read this. Most of y'all, I'm assuming pretty much everyone who is listening to this cannot read this. There are really only about 200 people in the world who can read this stuff. 150 of them are in China, 30 of them are in Japan, 15 of them are in Korea, and then the rest are scattered across America, Canada, Britain, something like that. So 200 people have the special training that it takes to read this. This writing, when you look at it, you can definitely see that there is some relationship to Chinese, but it's completely incomprehensible to someone if you have not been specially trained to read this. Whew, that was a lot. Sorry, I threw a lot at you. But now I can say, finally, that I did oracle bones. I think that's a good place to end it. Before I let you go, I'm just going to say, 恭喜发财. I hope you get wealthy. That's another one of those 新年吉祥话, the lucky phrases that you're supposed to use during Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year is coming up. Should it come 2 or 1 day after this podcast airs. I wish all a fantastic Chinese New Year. 恭喜发财. This is the Chinese Literature Podcast saying 再见.